Our first presenter is Sherri Gordon. She's the Assistant Vice President for Professional Services at South Regional Healthcare. Please go ahead, Sherri.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
And Sherri, have you requested control?
I am doing that as we speak.
Okay, all right.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. After hearing the last couple of sessions, wow, we're going to shift gears a good bit and talk a little bit about how do we engage teams that are predominantly working from home. And I requested control, but now I seem to be struggling to make the slide go forward. Give me 1 second.
If you go down, go to the bottom of the slide, bottom left, there should be some little controls that pop up that are like little arrows.
Okay.
Right where you are. Do you see that arrow? Perfect.
I got it to work. Okay. First technology glitch of the day. So today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about some of the lessons learned at Self Regional as we sent a large portion of our workforce home back in 2020 when we first had our big surge with COVID. One of the interesting things, I'm a clinician by background. I'm actually a respiratory therapist. I've been one for 37 years, but the last probably 20 years or so of my career have been in organizational development and then most recently with professional services. But I think as a clinician, I never really thought a lot about working from home because we take care of patients and we do that, in person. So I think it was a big shift for us, and obviously it was predominantly finance folks at first, IT folks that we were sending home, but we really started to ask ourselves, how do we make sure that we engage our remote teams? Interestingly enough, before COVID, really very few folks worked from home, and most people had never worked from home. And we know now that for some folks, it turned out to be something that they really enjoy. For some organizations, it's also proven to be super beneficial. And so post-COVID, we think that there'll still be folks that remain home. At the end of the day, leadership comes back to relationships. So whether you have a team that's working remotely or a team that you are leading day-to-day, face-to-face, it's about really keeping that team engaged. Back in the summer of 2020, I had an opportunity to participate in a program through Harvard's Continuing Education Division. And it was really about how do you engage remote teams. A lot of the emphasis was on how do you maintain engagement, how do you keep those relationships going. Another big concern that a lot of us had, particularly those of us who were remaining on site, is how do we make sure that our expectations as a customer are being met? How do we make sure that people are maintaining a level of productivity? And then I hesitate to use the word resilience, but it had a little bit different context back in the summer of 2020. But how do we make sure that we're not only maintaining resilience, but we are building teams that can have resilience for the future? I think COVID has taught us a whole lot of things, and particularly how important it is to be able to regroup, readjust, get creative when things become completely different than what most of us have ever experienced. To start out with, this is actually a pre-COVID graph that Gallup organization put out, and the top green line is really showing you the percent of engaged folks. And you can see that the most engaged people tend to be people who do some type of hybrid work. So they work a couple of days a week from home, a couple of days a week in the office. The black line actually shows you the percent of people who feel burned out at work, and they answer that question that they very often or they always feel burned out at work. And then the darker green line are folks that believe they get meaningful feedback. So you can see that that darker green line shows us that for folks working face-to-face as well as those that are working remotely pre-COVID, folks didn't feel like they were getting a whole lot of feedback from their leadership. And there was a fair level of burnout. And I think we all know if we were to ask these same questions today, that burnout percentage would be significantly higher. At the end of the day, leaders have a huge responsibility because according to the Gallup organization, we still own about 70% of our team members' engagement. And so much of that is about the relationships that we build. I was listening to a podcast that the advisory board put out, and I thought it was really interesting that they were discussing how much stress the COVID pandemic had on frontline leaders in healthcare. So whether your team stayed in the organization, provided care, they worked in employee health, and we all know the challenges those departments had over the last couple of years, or whether they were managing teams from home, the leaders, the frontline leaders, the supervisors and the managers really have been through a lot in the last 24 months. With that being said, it still is that direct leader that impacts a person's engagement the most. So how do you build those relationships as a leader? And this really is for remote teams as well as for those teams that you do lead face-to-face. The big thing is to make sure that you have time for one-on-ones. Groups are really important, and for some folks, depending on their personality styles, it can be even more important, but that one-on-one has to remain. And I think one of the biggest things we have to ask our teams is, how are you feeling and how are things going outside of work? I've never worked remotely. I was in a position where I stayed on site, but I can imagine, and talking to folks, they tell me how difficult it is to separate work and home life. One of the big things is, how do you turn it off and not end up working 10, 12, 14 hours a day? The other thing is, maybe as an only child, I didn't feel this. I don't think I would feel this that much, but that feeling of isolation and loneliness. And even if you think about folks who maybe live alone, they're used to coming to work. That was their social life. That was really the interactions that they had. We need to make sure that we have programs in place, or that we reach out to people and let them know that they can talk to us. Because there has been that feeling of isolation and loneliness. Of note, some newer research suggests that our teams that stayed in-house also feel that isolation and loneliness because they couldn't sit in the break rooms. We didn't even want people to eat together because they would be taking their mask off. When you're working with your remote teams, technology issues can be a challenge. Make sure they have the tools and equipment that they need. Make sure they know what they need to be working on, because there's not that chance for small talk and redirection. And then, team members need feedback, but leaders need feedback as well. So ask them, what could I do differently? As far as building relationships within the team, now that they're not seeing each other every day, it's real important to talk about having some type of huddle or a meeting. That might be daily, it might be weekly, but it should be more frequently than what you would do if you're face-to-face. We realized that the full screen was really important. We wanted people to actually turn their camera on. Now, that's been interesting because a lot of us, including me, didn't have a camera on our computer. We wanted people, though, to really make an effort to connect with one another and to offer that support. And some of the things that, we did and we read about were virtual coffee breaks, doing a yoga class together, sending ingredients to people's homes in a box, kind of like the HelloFresh ideas, and people doing a cooking class together. And there were also some folks who talked about virtual happy hours, which sounded like something that I might enjoy. Basically, for your virtual meetings, you just wanted to make sure that you plan just like you would if it was a face-to-face meeting. Who needs to be there? And oftentimes with virtual meetings, that needs to be a larger audience rather than a smaller audience. If you're asking questions, giving plenty of time for people to give their feedback, and then making sure to send out notes. One of the things they taught us at Harvard was ask a question, then take a sip of water, swallow that water, and then that gives people time to speak up. Make sure you look like you try, so making sure that you look engaged, you get dressed, you fix your hair, and then being cognizant of background noise. I don't know how many of y'all have been on lots of Teams meetings this year, but hearing people's dogs bark and children in the background, sometimes it might make it come off that you're not 100% engaged in what you're doing. Make sure that there's expectations and clear expectations. One of the big things is letting folks know that we're flexible. If you're working from home, it can be flexible. But we need to know, are we going to work a standard 9 to 5? And then when do you cut it off? Because if we don't make sure to set those boundaries, you'll have team members who really burn themselves out by not turning off work and starting their personal life. Back to that whole idea of resilience. Basically, if you look at folks who reported anxiety or depression pre-COVID, it was about 11% of the population. But if you look at December 2020, and I'm sure this number has probably grown because the second surge was even more impactful, at least it was for us itself, about 42% report feelings of anxiety and depression. And basically what we need to do as leaders is figure out what we can do to build resilience within our team. And when we say resilience, again, I've seen some funny memes about this recently. We're really just talking about the ability to move forward. And one of the things that a lot of authors relate it to is using a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger you get. But I think we always also have to remember as leaders that when you use a muscle too much, you can strain it. And we want to make sure that that's not where our team is now. Leading with resilience is all about engaging others in shared meaning. We really want to get people to figure out how to be more creative. COVID, we had to really look at our traditional definition of care. And depending on where you were in the country, was how much you had to modify that. So really building a team on intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, and really getting people to understand a deeper connection to their purpose. One of the things that we faced that I think everybody probably faced was healthcare provider shortages. We had the same thing that lots of people had. We had a lot of our workforce that left to go traveling. We ended up with travelers. We did things to try to increase staffing levels. And at the end of the day, some of that extrinsic motivation can be counterintuitive, especially to a group that's already pretty exhausted. So really, as a leader, connecting them back to that passion becomes really, really important. This is just some of the things we learned at Harvard as far as how resilient you are and how resilient your team is. And I think one of the big things that's been standing out to me in the last 3 to 4 months or so is how do you both honor and handle your emotions, because I think we would be doing everybody a disservice if we don't acknowledge what people have been through. And that's people that have worked 100% remote, because it's just been such a different challenge for folks. And then really becoming adaptable. I think as leaders, one of the best things we can do is help our team adapt to changing situations. When my 28-year-old daughter was much, much younger, she was a big fan of Winnie the Pooh, and Tigger was really one of my favorite characters in the book. But, you know, Tigger was all the time talking about bouncing back and how high you could bounce. And so I think COVID has taught us that it really is about how well we're able to bounce and bounce back. And I do think that there's some big lessons learned during the last couple of years that will, when we all get to the other side of it, will help us be better leaders. I know it's going to help us. I know if we go back and really evaluate what we've learned and put those lessons in motion, it's going to create a brighter future for everyone. And I think resilience is really just about being able to show up every day. The future is flexible. We believe, not Sherri personally, but experts believe that when all this is over, that most employers are going to continue to let their team members work from home at least some of the time. And we know that our workers are telling us that's what they want to do. And so I think the future is going to be very, very flexible. And it's going to really show us how productive a remote workforce can be. And I think a lot of us started out 2020 and early 2021 saying, I'll just be glad when we go back to the way it used to be. I don't think we're going to go back to the way it used to be, but I think we are going to have a better tomorrow because of the lessons learned. Thank you guys so much. I'll be glad to answer any questions. I think I'm right at my time, though.